UPSC have asked almost one question at least every year. Most of the question are on the troposphere. Hello student, welcome back to IASbaba. This is a very important session for those students who are giving 2026 prelims exam. Student, prelims in the recent year have become so very dicey that it is often said that it is easy to clear mains but difficult to clear prelims. Now, what is the reason that prelims have become so very dicey and unpredictable? It is the UPSC going into the depth of the topic. And this is a place where most of the students who are basically the beginners, they make mistake. You cannot take UPSC lightly, especially the prelims part, because unlike the previous like 10-15 years ago, wherein UPSC would not ask that very in-depth question, these years they are going into the detail in order to see how depth the student have knowledge on certain topic. So instead of just cramming around and having a shallow knowledge, knowing something about everything, it is what is needed is you should know everything about something. So here, taking one topic into consideration, we will try to catch the pulse of the UPSC. So what is the approach? The approach is, of course, look into the syllabus. As such, the syllabus given by the UPSC prelims is just one-liner. For geography, you can see India and world geography, physical, social, economic geography of India and world. That is not sufficient enough. You certainly need to go into the previous year question paper, understanding them, taking the dimensions out of every topic will help you better understand a certain topic. Then following the current affair. We see in the recent years students cramming the current affair, the monthly magazine and the annual compilation. Student, that is not going to help you at all. You need to understand why you should refer a current affair. For that, UPSC previous year's question paper and its analysis will help you why that specific question was asked. So do not run behind a question and just the answer of it. Rather, ask yourself, if that question was asked by UPSC in 2022 or 2023, why UPSC asked question? So there are many questions, there are many conceptual questions on which people can mark the answer so very easily, but let me tell you, those were derived from the current affair. So if you have a very good understanding of the concepts and if you have a very strong command over the fundamental topic, current affair is not going to harm you at all. So the crux is the current affair should be understood, taking previous year question paper into consideration. Then you go into the depth of the topic. Having done that, then you solve some more questions also, and that has to be done for every topic, for every subtopic, then subject, and then the overall general studies. Okay. So if we look into the previous year's question paper trend of prelims, we can see that there are certain areas on which frequently UPSC asks questions. So here in this session, I'm going to deal with the climatology aspect. You can see from 2013 till 2025, last 7-year trend, if you see, UPSC have asked almost one question at least every year, with a maximum of 6 questions also. Last year they had asked 3 questions. So this frequency helps you to understand which topic is repeated by the UPSC and wherein there is very high chances that if you study those topics in very detail, you will get questions. Likewise, there are other topics also. For example, you can see this question on the drainage system of India. Every year they are asking question. You can also see question on the agriculture. Almost every year they are asking question. Similarly, the resources and the minerals. Okay. You can see the world mapping also, world mapping and the India mapping. So we will take into consideration those topics also. First, let us understand climatology. So there are various topics in the climatology, out of which we are going to focus on one topic. So if we take climatology as a topic, there are several subtopics like heat budget, composition and structure of atmosphere, temperature distribution of the world, pressure belts, humidity, wind, then clouds and thunderstorms, rainfall, etc. There are so many topics, out of which we are going to focus on one topic in this session, that is the composition and structure of the atmosphere. Now let me tell you, that UPSC have neither mentioned climatology in its syllabus, but yes, there are many questions, and within the climatology, forget about these terms being mentioned anywhere in the syllabus. Not even in the mains these terms are there, but question have been asked. For example, on composition and structure of the atmosphere, you can see these questions have been asked. For example, in 2025, UPSC had asked question on the temperature, that what will happen if there is no atmosphere. Okay, what will be the effects upon that of the Earth's temperature, okay, and the atmospheric gases, and especially they have asked question on the carbon dioxide. So I will take this into consideration. Okay, in the composition structure of the atmosphere, I must take into consideration the carbon dioxide and its role in maintaining the Earth's temperature, also the role of the atmosphere. So once you start solving previous year's question paper, do not just focus on the statements and the answer key, rather go into the detail of the topic, and the most importantly, why this question, why was this question being asked. So though it is a fundamental and static question, but in the recent year, as you know, that the climate is changing and many initiatives are being taken into consideration to mitigate the global warming, especially reducing the greenhouse gases, that is carbon dioxide. So a lot of initiatives is being taken into consideration, 2023 being one of the hottest year, 2024, 2025 these are relatively hotter only, and subsequent years would be more hotter. So climate change is bound to happen, and climate related question is bound to come in the exam. Okay. Similarly, in 2025 they had asked question on the dust particles in the atmosphere. Okay, so where are they, more or less? Okay, so we will take into consideration dust particles also. You can see again why the question, hint and logic. So not only understanding of the question, solving the questions, there are certain questions which are moderate enough, which can be solved, having the informed guessing, or basically can say having some prior little bit of knowledge, and some hint or some logic which is hidden in the question itself will help you to solve those questions. So we'll learn those hint and the logic, how to find them. Subsequently, they had asked question on the water vapor, that was asked way back in the year 2024. Then they had asked question on the thickness of the atmosphere. Let me tell you, this is a repeated question. Okay, thickness of the atmosphere, okay, wherein how the heat is transported in those areas. This is no doubt a fundamental static question, but it was there in the news also, because that year climate change was altering the Earth's atmosphere, when in the thickness variations and the temperature variations in the different places taking place. So it was being asked because of this being the current affair. You can see thickness of the atmosphere. This question was asked way back to in the year 2004. And this question, thickness of the atmosphere, was asked, troposphere, was asked in 2024. So out of 20 years, the question was repeated. Okay, so UPSC can ask repeated questions if the questions are fundamental and conceptual based. So question can be asked any year. Similarly, with respect to the lower stratosphere, this question was asked in 2011. So all of this question is related to one topic only, that is the structure and composition of the atmosphere. They had asked question of the ionosphere also, and so these are roughly 7 questions which were being asked from one subtopic, that is within climatology. It was the composition and structure of atmosphere. Now, how am I supposed to study this? So here, with respect to studying this topic, we need to make short notes. Okay, with respect to this, you can see the structure of the atmosphere. So the structure of the atmosphere, which is given in the NCERT, also says that there are multiple layers, that is the troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, the ionosphere and the exosphere. So basically this is the thermosphere, and this is the basically the two classification, that is heterogeneous and the homogeneous classification, which we need to understand. We need to understand that there are 3 important parameters, that is the temperature, density and the pressure. Here in this case, the density and the pressure constantly keeps on reducing with the increasing altitude, but with respect to the temperature, that is not the case. Temperature decreases remains constant, increases, remains constant, decreases, remain constant, increases. So basically the temperature variation is being seen, but density and pressure constantly reduces. You can see with respect to the troposphere, its thickness varies from 8 to 18 km from the surface of the earth, whereas the stratosphere, mesosphere and the other layers do not fluctuate or do not vary a lot. Here most of the question are on the troposphere. In fact, once in the mains also troposphere related question were being asked. Here what is the basis of the classification? As I said, homosphere and heterosphere classification is on the basis of the chemical composition, whereas on the basis of physical composition, physical properties. Physical properties are basically the temperature, density and the pressure. The classification is troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere and so on. With respect to the composition of the atmosphere, if you see, we have nitrogen as a major composition, then we have oxygen, then we have water vapor, then we have other gases also, we have carbon dioxide, we have dust particles also. So as you can remember that there were question on the water vapor and there were question on the dust particles. So with respect to the water vapor, it mainly ranges from 0 to 90 km in the atmosphere. It is an important greenhouse gas, and the water vapor ka concentration is very high in the warm and the wet tropical areas. So these are basically the tropical equatorial region, you can understand, equatorial low pressure belt region. Also in the case of the subpolar low pressure belt, you can have like relatively more proportion as compared to that of the polar region, and the proportion is very less in the dry and the polar region. From equator, if I go towards pole, from the equator if I go towards the pole, the composition of the water vapor starts to reduce, and from the surface of the earth, if I go up in the atmosphere, that as altitude increases, the proportion of the water vapor decreases. So just a short note, a small note on the water vapor, and I will have one question ready for me. Similarly, you had seen a question on the dust particle. This was asked this year 2025 itself. With respect to the dust particles, where is the proportion high? It is high in the subtropical and the temperate region. So dust particles are mainly seen in the drier region. Okay, dry region, because if the region is wet region, if the rainfall is there, then the rainfall, okay, will help the dust particle to settle down. So these will not be found in those warm tropics. These will be mainly found in those regions which is relatively drier, and mainly in those regions where wind are blowing offshore, that is from land towards the ocean. So that the wind is relatively drier, the region is drier, okay, and because of that dryness, the dust particle concentration is relatively higher. If the wind is blowing onshore, that is from ocean towards the land, if it is blowing, it will bring moisture, it will bring rain, and it will settle down the atmospheric dust particles. So mainly in the subtropical region, temperate region, especially drier region, okay, and the concentration of dust particles is relatively less in the equatorial and polar region. Equatorial region because everyday rainfall is there, dust particles settle down, and the polar region because it is mainly frozen, so dust particle is not there. Just on these two lines, there was one question being asked in 2025, as you had seen the question. So basically this is the way to which a student can make short notes and make an effective notes, okay, for the prelims perspective. Likewise, you can make it for the mains also. Here, with respect to individual layer, that is troposphere, stratosphere, how should you make notes, or the skill of the making notes is that you need to understand certain parameters. For example, with respect to the troposphere, the thickness of the troposphere varies from 8 to 18 kilometer. The thickness is less in the polar region because warm air rises upwards, and thickness will be more in the warmer region. In the equatorial region, the thickness is relatively higher because in the equatorial region, you can see this, the thickness is relatively high in the equatorial region because this region is relatively warmer, air becomes hot and hot air rises to a greater height. Whereas in the polar region is cold, air becomes cold, cold air do not rises to a greater height. So in the polar region, the thickness is less, and in the equatorial subtropical region, the thickness is relatively high. The maximum thickness is 18 kilometer, which is in the equator, and this is because of the hot air rising upward, technically known as convection. Okay, so likewise, one very important note: atmosphere is always heated from below. What is the reason? Because incoming solar radiation, which is responsible for the heating of the surface of the earth, do not causes heating of the atmosphere. So the understanding of this is in the previous section, which talks about the earth's atmospheric heating, and this is mainly because of the solar radiation. But solar radiation, not the incoming one, rather the one which is going, that is the thermal terrestrial radiation. This was also asked by UPSC. This was asked way back in the year 2023. So basically, the sunlight contains ultraviolet radiation, visible radiation, and infrared radiation. UV radiation 5%, visible 42%, infrared 53%. So maximum concentration of the solar radiation consists of infrared radiation, and within the infrared radiation, this is responsible for the heating of the atmosphere. Now this was asked in UPSC. You need to understand this also. What is the wavelength of these set of radiation along with its frequency? You may not necessarily remember the data, but try to understand that UV radiation have got low wavelength, high frequency, and infrared radiation have got higher wavelength and lesser frequency. You need to understand this relation, by the way. Okay, getting back to the composition and the structure of the atmosphere, we understood the thickness. Now it is time to understand the temperature. As we had studied that with the increasing altitude, what happens is temperature decreases. So temperature decreases at the rate of 6.5 degrees Celsius per 1 kilometer, or 1 degree Celsius decreases after every 165 meter. Because atmosphere always heats up from below, it does not heat up from top. Okay, proceeding further, you can understand that this is the graph of thickness of atmosphere, and this is the graph of temperature of the atmosphere. You can see at equator the temperature is not maximum, the temperature is maximum at subtropics. Okay, the thickness is maximum at the equator. The temperature is maximum at the tropics. Why? Because equator pe everyday rainfall happens, and because of this everyday rainfall, the temperature falls down. Okay, and the temperature do not peaks in the equator, it is peak at the tropic. This was also another UPSC question. Okay, the thickness do not remain, the temperature do not remain permanent throughout the year, because the sun position with respect to the different latitudes on the surface of the earth changes because of the earth's revolution around the sun. Okay, so at times the north hemisphere is relatively more warmer as compared to the south, and at times south is more hotter as compared to that of the north. Now proceeding further with another important aspect is heating and cooling of the atmosphere. As we discussed just now, that this earth's air becomes hot from the below, so as the altitude increases, temperature keeps on decreasing. Now there is one concept of the transfer of the heat, and that concept is conduction, convection, advection. You need to understand this. Convection have been asked by UPSC many times. Okay, so both are the process of transfer of the heat. Conduction, convection, both are process of transfer of the heat. Conduction mein what happens is, here the transfer of the heat takes place without actual movement of the particles. Heat transfer takes place in both. In conduction, no movement of particles, whereas in convection, movement of particle takes place. For example, this hot air, the hot air becomes hot because it comes in contact with the surface of the earth. Okay, it comes in contact with the surface of the earth. Okay, heat exchange takes place, but this hot air rises upward. So along with the heat, air particles have also traveled. So here in this case, the transportation of the heat takes place, or the transfer of the heat, because of traveling of that of the air particles. So that process is known as convection, and this process is known as conduction. So the way as the altitude increases, temperature decreases. In the similar way, as the altitude decreases, temperature increases. Okay, so the cooling and the heating rate is relatively same. Heating or you say cooling is 1 degree per 165 meter increase in the height. Heating also takes place, temperature increases by 1 degree after every 165 meter fall in the height. Okay, now this is very important, because this phenomena is responsible for a lot of atmospheric phenomena like clouds formation, the water cycle, precipitation, again the convection and all of the climatic phenomena, okay, takes place in this region. Dust particles which act as a nuclei, and it is responsible for the rain, very significant factor. All of the important wind patterns, you take all the planetary winds, okay, like the primary winds, the secondary or the tertiary winds, trade winds, the westerlies or the easterlies, all of these wind pattern take place in the tropospheric region. Transfer of the heat, we know that heat transfer takes place from surplus region towards the deficit region. So in the surplus region, this is the tropical region where the heat builds up relatively more. Polar region, it is the heat deficit region. So what happens is the heat transfer takes place from surplus towards the deficit, and this region, that is the mid latitude region, is the region wherein the heat exchange is taking place. And wherever the heat exchange takes place, a lot of climatic phenomena would happen, a lot of disturbance would happen in these areas. So these areas will frequently experience rainfall, thunderstorms, lightning. Okay, water cycle, another important aspect that takes place in the troposphere, and the turbulence in the atmosphere, especially causing turbulence to the transportation, also takes place mainly in the troposphere region. That is the reason why most of the aeroplanes, commercial or the you can say the fighter planes, all of these travel in the troposphere or lower stratosphere to avoid the turbulence of the troposphere. And this was also one of the question being asked in the UPSC way back in the year 2011. Now, with respect to the troposphere, as we know, this is the layer wherein ultraviolet radiation is radiation is being trapped, mainly because of the ozone layer. So ozone layer is found at the range of 10 to 50 kilometer, and UV radiation, which is UVA, UVB and UVC. So UV radiation B is being trapped over here. So it, and the rest of the radiation, which includes, so basically there were three: UV radiation, visible radiation and infrared radiation. So UV radiation is mainly being caught over here. So remaining two, that is visible radiation and infrared radiation, enters the Earth's atmosphere further and heats up the Earth surface. Okay, this is very significant with respect to that of the catching of the UV radiation. And ozone layer, ozone hole formation and filling up of the ozone layer, that is another important set of the topic that needs to be studied, along with that of the problems related to the ozone depleting substances and the protocol that helps prevent the release of the ozone depleting substances. So that can be related with the environment also. Okay, now mesosphere, majority of the meteoroids that enters into Earth atmosphere gets burnt up in this mesosphere. Had mesosphere been not being there, you can imagine what would have been the impact on the Earth, when these big asteroids would have fallen on the Earth without getting burnt out. And another important layer, that is the within thermosphere, there is this ionosphere. So ionosphere, as it have lots of ions, it facilitates the radio communication, especially the high frequency shorter wavelength, which is mainly used in the radio communication. Okay, so we have certain layers of the atmosphere, and these layers are being asked by the UPSC quite frequently. And most favorite layer is the troposphere, which were being asked not only in prelims but in the mains also. One full mains question had also come. So likewise, if we do the analysis of previous years, then find out the topic and then come out with the subtopic, and we prepare a short notes on that, and not to forget that we have to associate this with the current affair also. So since this is climate, and climate is ever changing, and climate change is a burning topic since last couple of decades, and it will be in the news in the coming years also. So climate change will be altering the structure and composition of the atmosphere to a greater extent. So this will be a very hot topic for every year. So identifying these topic is one critical task, which if the student does it on its own, will take enormous amount of time. So here at IASbaba, our objective is to hit the bullseye. Through extensive research, we come up with such kind of understanding and delivery of these topic. So I wish you all the very best, and hope to see you in this batch. All the very best. Thank you.